Have you ever imagined that one of the most influential apostles of Christianity had a past marked by serious mistakes? And we're not talking about small missteps, but actions that put lives at risk. Paul's journey is one of the most impressive transformations ever recorded in the Bible. But there is a little explored detail about his story, a factor that could completely change your perspective on him. What almost prevented him from becoming an apostle of Christ? Today, you will learn about Paul's 3 biggest mistakes before his conversion, understand his radical change, and see how his transformation shaped Christianity. However, the 3rd mistake is the most shocking because it reveals something that few people notice about his journey. Stay with us until the end of this video, because the revelations we will share may transform your perception of faith. And before we begin, subscribe to the Millennial Wisdom channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming content. Paul's first big mistake was believing that he was serving God when, in reality, he was going against him. If you've ever wondered what Paul was like before his conversion, know that he was an extremely educated man and deeply knowledgeable about the law. Saul of Tarsus had a solid religious education and was a disciple of Gamaliel, one of Judaism's most respected teachers. Moreover, he was fervent in his faith and zealous for the traditions of his people. But here was his biggest mistake. He confused religiosity with true faith. For him, following rituals and preserving customs was more important than understanding the essence of God's will. Saul thought he was protecting the Jewish faith from threats, without realizing that by persecuting Christians, he was opposing the divine plan. Jesus had already warned about this type of behavior. In Matthew 15 verse 8, he said, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." This was Paul's first mistake. He believed he was serving God with his knowledge and religious practices, but in reality, he was blind to the truth. Now think, how many times do we follow traditions and rules without realizing that we are resisting what God really wants to teach us? This spiritual blindness led Paul to commit his second fatal mistake. Paul's second big mistake was becoming a fierce persecutor of Christians. Little is said about how Paul acted before his conversion. He not only ignored Jesus' message, he actively persecuted those who believed in him. In Acts 8 verse 3, we read that Saul ravaged the church, invaded homes, dragged Christians out, and threw them into prison. However, he did not do this out of pure cruelty. In his view, he was defending his faith. What he did not realize was that, in reality, he was fighting against God's own purpose. This story teaches us something valuable. Being sincerely convinced of something does not mean being right. Paul was completely convinced that he was doing good, but in reality, he was opposing the divine plan. The most critical point of this mistake occurred at the death of Stephen. Stephen was brutally stoned for preaching about Christ, and Paul not only witnessed the event but also approved and encouraged his execution. Think about this. Paul helped kill a righteous man, full of the Holy Spirit, who was merely sharing the truth about Jesus. Even after this event, he continued his fierce persecution. With extreme determination, he sought permission from the high priest to persecute Christians in other cities. His goal was to completely eradicate this new faith. It was precisely on this mission that Paul had an encounter that would change his story forever. But even after everything, did he still try to resist God's calling? This is the most surprising mistake, and we are going to talk about it now. Imagine yourself in Paul's position. You spend years believing in something, dedicating your life to it, and suddenly you discover that you were completely wrong. How would you react? It took an extraordinary event for him to finally see the truth. In Acts 9 verses 3 to 4, it is written, "As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?' The light that blinded him represented the spiritual darkness in which he lived. For 3 days, Paul was without sight, without eating, and without drinking. 3 days of darkness, 3 days of silence, 3 days of reflection on everything he had done. The man who once thought he had all the answers now found himself completely dependent on God. This mistake teaches us something essential. How many times do we ignore the signs and resist the divine call? How many opportunities do we waste by insisting on our own ways? Paul's story shows us that even the greatest mistakes can be transformed into purpose. But what if his story had ended differently? Think about it. He persecuted and harmed the followers of Christ, but he found redemption. Now, compare his journey with that of Judas Iscariot. Both committed grave failures. Both had an encounter with the truth, but only one of them found grace. What distinguished the two? Do we really know all the details about Judas' death? This is one of Christianity's greatest enigmas, and there is information that few people know. If you want to find out what really happened to Judas, watch our other video, How Did Judas Iscariot Really Die? The shocking truth few know. You might be surprised. While Judas was consumed by the weight of his guilt, Paul chose a different path. The three great mistakes of his life, spiritual blindness, the persecution of Christians, and resistance to God's call, show us that even the gravest failures can be used for a greater purpose. If God was able to transform a relentless persecutor into the greatest apostle of Christianity, what can he do in your life? Maybe you have felt like Paul, trapped in empty dogmas, ignoring the signs, and resisting God's plan. But the good news is that it is never too late to change. Now I ask you, has God ever tried to speak to you, but you haven't realized it yet? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts. If this video made sense to you, like and share it with others. And of course, subscribe to the Millennial Wisdom channel for more content like this. See you in the next video.